What's next for Ethereum? Does it have a chance to reach a new ATH? Or will we witness the most spectacular collapse of one of the largest projects in the world? What is Ethereum? How does it work? Why do I think it's weak? What exactly needs to happen for the project to grow? Why are the big players buying? What do we see on the chart? Why did I speculatively buy ATH? And why do I believe that over time and with the passing years, this project will simply die? A very controversial episode. I think it's very interesting. So watch, sit back comfortably. Welcome. Listen, to start off, in order to begin the whole discussion, to start the entire deliberation about Ethereum, let's talk about what it is. And it is a blockchain project that was created in 2015, developed by Vitalik Buterin and a team of programmers, of course, because he didn't create it alone, enabling the operation of smart contracts. And it is, listen, a layer 1 that introduced the EVM, which is the so-called Ethereum virtual machine, which means it supports smart contract applications, simply being the foundation for most of today's compatible blockchains, precisely with this EVM. And Ethereum focuses on providing decentralized infrastructure specifically for decentralized finance. Although we know that nowadays, unfortunately, this decentralization on Ethereum is crap, worthless. Of course, this also applies to NFTs, Web3 applications, and a broad developer ecosystem where initially everything was built on Ethereum, meaning the entire Internet of Things was built on Ethereum. That's why it is, you could say, at the top initially, because there weren't other projects at the beginning where you could build so many things and elements like on Ethereum. That's why to this day, it is so well established. And unfortunately here, when it comes to speed, the network itself offers a maximum of 100 transactions per second, which is really a very, very poor result. So if we were to delve into the topic of ideal transmission conditions, where the finality would be around 12-14 seconds. And of course, this is only after the update to proof of stake, because previously Ethereum operated on proof of work, and at this moment it is proof of stake, which makes it, listen, my dear friends, one of the most well-known networks, and at the same time one of the slowest in the entire blockchain world. Or maybe not the world, but let's focus here specifically on layer 1. However, the maximum speed I mentioned to you, which is 100 transactions per second, is of course under the most optimal, best conditions. In everyday situations, such daily usage, well, here the number of transactions drastically drops as it falls to 15 to 30 transactions per second, which is a totally weak result compared to, of course, other projects. Layer 1. And the actual true record of Ethereum transactions per second, listen, is 25. And of course, here we are talking about such periods of high traffic. Here, comparing to other networks. I won't do that, because if you watch my previous episode with Sonica, which is now displayed for you, on the screen you will see how overwhelmingly large the number of transactions is on other projects compared to Ethereum. And now the purpose of this episode is not to show you that Ethereum is amazing or that Ethereum is terrible. The point of this episode is to realistically show you how this project works, what it is about, and why. I personally believe that it operates solely because it was one of the first and now the entire migration. All the elements built on Ethereum migrating to another layer 1 or starting to build on another layer 1 will simply take years. But from the perspective of a very long term, Ethereum, in my opinion, sooner or later must disappear from the face of the earth if it doesn't introduce sensible, significant improvements, because now there are a lot of projects that are 100 times better than ETH. Of course, we're not talking about Bitcoin here. Bitcoin is the king. Bitcoin was the first. It started it all. The entire era of blockchains. So it's a completely different situation. So to not waste time, you currently have on the screen a table that shows you a comparison of Ethereum, Sonic Labs, Arbitrum, Solana, Polygon, Algorand, Avalanche, and Bitcoin, where Algorand is in the first place, Sonica in the second, also two very strong, well-known projects with ISO 2022. But now let's talk a bit about costs, because the transfer on the network itself. It's not just about being fast, but also about being cheap. So let's start with the main character of today's episode, namely the costs of Ethereum, average, or actually eternity or amillennium. The average daily transfer costs on this network are between 50 cents and, my dear friends, up to $5. And of course, this is based on Ethereum and the network traffic from March 2025, although I must honestly admit to you that over the past 2 to 3 years I had transfers, for example, NFT tokens, which cost me over $160, which is a total abstraction. Of course, the costs of transferring over the Ethereum network depend on how overloaded the network is, how many transactions are being sent. Although in reality, at the moment of the network's highest load, transaction costs can reach even several dozen dollars, making it one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive networks in the cryptocurrency space. For comparison, Sonic from the previous episode, the average transaction cost in a heavily congested, so to speak, network, I have to read this, is 0.01 to $0.001, which means, my dear friends, that Ethereum compared to, for example, Sonic is several hundred times more expensive. So don't be surprised that I fundamentally consider this project to be total garbage. Bitcoin, of course, is a different story because the average transaction costs, while the transaction is very, very long, are between 50 cents and $20. Let's take Solana, for example. There, the sending costs are 0.25 to 1 cent, which is quite cheap. There's no denying it, however, the Solana network is very, very unstable. It often encounters situations where transactions are simply stopped, transactions are blocked, transactions get stuck somewhere on the blockchain, and you can't actually access your funds at that moment. You just have to wait until the network clears up. So, what's the point of using a network that is relatively cheap, but not hundreds of times cheaper, for example, than something like Sonic, and at the same time is unstable? This should already be a red flag, because what we want is to transfer quickly and cheaply. Sometimes we even prefer to go quickly rather than being extremely cheap, because we care more about the speed. So again, to not waste time, I'm putting a table on the screen right now, comparing the costs of various Layer 1 blockchains. And now we will talk about the next very important thing regarding Ethereum, specifically development, meaning how the Ethereum is for developers. And you've often heard that Ethereum attracts developers because the network has been live since 2015. So let's talk for a moment about what it offers to programmers. Because, my dear friends, without developers, the network is really worth nothing. And of course, the network supports Solidity smart contracts. And it was a pioneer, you could say, in this field, opening many doors to applications such as blockchain games, DeFi platforms, or NFT markets. And of course, Ethereum, it must be admitted, is a precursor in many fields, in many blockchain aspects. And of course, Ethereum has an enormous, so to speak, ecosystem of tools that you could say facilitate the creation of these dApps. And developers, of course, earn from gas fees, which essentially are for the transaction. Although most of it today goes to validators, especially after the upgrade to proof of stake. And here we can't only speak negatively about Ethereum because it also has its good sides. Such as, for example, grant programs like the Ethereum Foundation, which supports, you could say, innovative projects distributing millions of dollars annually for the development of the ecosystem. So it's not just any network. In 2024, $30 million were allocated for grants. So of course, in Ethereum, we have minuses, but we also have pluses. So here one must realize, what is more important for us as network users, what is more important for developers, what we care about the most, and why we consider a project valuable or worthless. Everyone can have their own perspective. Mine is subjective. You may have a different one. And the fact that I think this project is crappy does not mean, my dear friends, that it won't achieve a huge result. It won't reach again $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. Anyway, we will move to the charts and I will show you this exactly. And here, of course, Ethereum also became very popular in its time, attractive to developers from other networks, because it was very easy to migrate or rather transfer projects with the ERC20 standard or ERC721. However, this was the case up to a certain point, because as of today, the only real task for developers is to escape. Actually, from Ethereum, and what of it that Ethereum is well connected for them, of course, for developers, you can do migration, etc. But why do it? When there are many networks that are faster, cheaper, and simpler to use, even something like Sonic Samshish, which at this moment is attracting a lot of people, actually not people, but developers to create new projects, new elements. And here you can't say, because Ethereum is also operating quite strongly and deeply in the world. Decentralized exchanges of projects, decentralized ones being home to most platforms which have obviously revolutionized crypto trading and Ethereum. It cannot be denied that it was a total precursor when it comes to the whole world. Decentralized. However, the time has come that on other projects you can also do the same. Ethereum did not develop quickly enough along with the market to be able to want, or rather simply want, to use this blockchain. And we're talking here, for example, about Uniswap, which you all know, which was created on the AMM model combined with Ethereum. And of course, it cannot be denied that Ethereum, it was pioneering. In 2013, it was conceived. This is a network concept by Vitalik Buterin, who is considered one of the most influential minds in the crypto world. And of course, technology, that was the case until a certain point in ETH's history, because in this cycle, it seems as if Vitalik has gone completely crazy, but it's not surprising when you look at how Ethereum is performing compared to other altcoins. And in general, compared to all projects on the market, I think one could go crazy being in his position. And my dear friends, when describing this project and its most important aspects, we cannot forget about statistics. So before we move on to charts and some light speculation, let's talk about this as well. The data is from January 1st, 2023 to today. And how do you see it? In the attached image, TVL, or total value locked, increased from $25.5 billion to $49.8 billion. At the peak of this bull market, it was $79 billion, whereas in the last cycle, it was as much as $105 billion. So one could say it's weak, considering that instead of growth, we have declines. The number of transactions, my dear friends, the average daily amount has stabilized at 1.3 million, and the total number of transactions is 2.8 billion. Active addresses increased more than fourfold at the peak, so here is a plus for Ethereum. Market capitalization, my dear friends, is an increase of 78%, which reflects the price of ETH. Unfortunately, this ETH price does not align with certain things, unfortunately. I wouldn't even say it's stagnant because it performs very poorly. But the future? What would need to happen, my dear friends, for Ethereum to really start performing well in this cycle? First and foremost, the success of the Pectra update. And the Pectra update, planned for 2025, must be implemented without delays and technical issues. It should, of course, introduce the promised improvements, which you probably don't know about. Maybe some of you haven't even heard of such an improvement, so it's worth mentioning. Better scalability payment. With multiple tokens, fee sponsorship, and higher staking limits, meaning lowering the threshold to 32 ethers. And why is this important? After the merge that happened in 2022, did Ethereum not meet investors' expectations? And unfortunately, investors lost faith. In this project, meaning Ethereum, you could say it's down only, meaning only decline without any significant pumping or even a reasonable breakout to a new ATH. And the upgrade? Pectra could actually restore, the narrative that would revolve around ETH. As a leader in innovation and a place where developers would start returning again due to the given upgrade. So at this moment, I think the growth of Dub's adoption and the influx of liquidity to layer 1, which would raise, you could say, the TVL or total value locked and the price of Ethereum. So when we get this Pectra, which actually happens well without delays, it may turn out that it causes a large influx of money into Ethereum, even test money, so to speak, and finally breaks a new ATH on ETH. Anyway, personally, as I told you, I think this project is crappy. However, speculatively, strictly based on how weak the narrative around ETH is, how many people are saying what I am, that the project is simply weak, they are giving up, as if they are disappointed with this project, while the big players are buying quite a bit of ETH. So I personally recently bought some Ether speculatively between $17.50 and $19.50, precisely for a potential breakout, just like it was with XRP, which lay dormant for almost 3 years. And everyone had already given up on this project, and suddenly it turned out that it performed. The best performance of the current bull market, which you are in now. Of course, hype is needed for NFTs. Of course, hype is needed for decentralized applications, decentralized exchanges, places that would be built on the Ethereum blockchain and come back to life. And why is this important? Because Ethereum is the foundation of DeFi, about 60% of the EVL in crypto, and it's layer 2. But currently, there's a decline on DEX due to the lack of new users. A very large number of projects weakens the demand for ETH. And the historical growth on DEX was what drove the price of ETH to high levels. And here, my dear friends, the situation is also quite interesting because the market is very diluted. Money, it doesn't go where it should. It goes into some total junk coins. Instead of going into Ethereum, instead of going into the largest market caps from the top 50. And this also affects why ETH is performing so poorly. And of course, we can also talk about the competition from layer 2 and other layer 1s. So what needs to happen? Ethereum would need to regain an advantage over layer 2 like Arbitrum and Optimism. Other layer 1s like Solana, Avalanche, Phantom, Algorand. So they would need to capture this market through faster transactions and lower fees, but this might be difficult. And even as of today, today's unfeasible. So, my dear friends, let's take a moment to look at the chart and see what's happening there. If we, my dear friends, take a look at the weekly chart for Ethereum, it doesn't look spectacular, but it also doesn't look tragic because we have, of course, broken through the upward channel that we have here. Since, you could say June or July 2022, at this moment, we have stopped where we had orders. We have a place of enormous liquidity for us. The most important aspect is for Ethereum not to fall below $1,600 because then it will look very bad. We will have to take $900 and maybe even break a new all-time low. So my dear friends, this is of course purely speculative. A purchase, the profits of which I will take equally at $2,250, $2,750, $3,500. And I'll leave. a small moonbag for the potential breakout of an ATH. So here, of course, it's a very good place for taking longs, for making spot purchases. If someone doesn't have Ethereum yet and wants to make their first purchases, this is it, of course. Turbo, a good place. However, keep in mind that if we start breaking downwards, it won't look good. The big players are buying very wisely because specific purchases are not visible on the chart, but in reality on the on-chains, it shows us that relatively a lot of these purchases are happening, so take that into account. Purely speculative. Sometimes it's even worth trading. So don't be surprised here that ETH, really at this moment, to regain dominance, to reach high valuations again, it won't happen just because someone bought something, someone pumped something, and we believe something will happen. It doesn't work like that. Ethereum would really need to get quite a significant upgrade, so let's hope that such a situation will occur, because I also care about it growing so that each of us can make money. However, without a strong upgrade, without better scalability of this network, the speed of Ethereum fees will slowly decline over time with small upticks. In my personal opinion, it will simply be dying, because developers purely logically will not want to participate in activities on Ethereum when they have much better networks, much cheaper, much faster, so why work on Ethereum? Although the transition of everything from Ethereum to some other layer, my dear friends, will take years. If we were to consider the death of Ethereum, it will take years. My dear friends, that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, let me know in the comments, thumbs up, subscribe, and ring the bell if you liked it. If so, let me know in the comments and I will record more episodes. Just like this, about other coins, about other projects you want to hear about. In the meantime, thank you very much. Take care for now. See you.